Welcome to the Ultimate Guide to Enterprise Security. I'll be your host today. My name is Katie, and I'm a consulting engineer for security at Jamf, but in a past life, I was an information systems security officer with extensive information security experience in the government space. Let's get right into it. Today we'll be talking about what enterprise security is, why enterprise security is important, what's out there that we need to protect against, and how we can protect ourselves. Now, the big question: what is enterprise security? I like to think of enterprise security as the big picture when it comes to securing company data. It encompasses multiple concerns, and it varies from industry to industry. Not only are we needing to protect proprietary company data, but we also need to consider employee and customer personal data, financial information, and possibly more. This protection needs to happen at the hardware, software level, and even at the level of the people we trust. We need to look at not only our data centers and cloud services, but also at the lowest level with our personnel and vendors. In the past few years, we have seen a major shift in the way companies operate, especially in 2020 with the start of COVID, when most employers made working from home pretty commonplace. On-prem data centers have become cloud-based, and cubicles have turned into people working from their home office. How do we protect something that isn't here? Right at the foundation of what we need to protect is my favorite thing, the CIA triad. First is confidentiality. You want your data to remain confidential. This means only select people are allowed access to this information and nobody else, even by word of mouth. Now, being in the government space for so long, I could talk for hours about this, but I'm going to spare you and keep it short and sweet here. There are many ways you can ensure your data is confidential, but some of them include firewalls, encryption, both in transit and at rest, user access control and privileges, proper privilege user training, and last but not least, a solid endpoint security solution to safeguard your data against attacks and notify you of suspicious behavior. Next is integrity. You want your data to remain intact with no changes over time. Attacks like man-in-the-middle attacks can intercept your data, and insider threats and user negligence are also a major concern. You can help to safeguard against the manipulation of your data by doing a few things, including backing up your data, audit trails, implementing change control, and more. Lastly, availability. You always want to maintain the availability of your information so that it may be accessed by the appropriate people at the appropriate time. You should, of course, have a solid security solution in place to prevent attacks and unwanted behaviors that might create issues such as crashed computers and ransomware attacks. Both these things and many more can definitely make it so you can't access your data when you need to. These here are some of the things that your security encompasses. First, let's talk about people. You need to protect your people's information. And what I mean by that is employee data and customer data. In terms of employee data, you definitely have more than you think. By that I mean their addresses, social security numbers, and then some. Customer data could include anything from socials to their credit card information, which is all very personal and very critical. Next, we have software. This one seems fairly self-explanatory. Just keep your software updated as soon as patches are released to solve known vulnerabilities. Don't download software that comes from a sketchy or unknown vendor because either of those circumstances could lead to some pretty nasty malware on your machines. Now, data centers. the heartbeat of your infrastructure. If you lose these, you lose your operability. The same goes for infrastructure as a service, but this is slightly more tricky because it isn't really physically there. IoT. This is fairly new to the information landscape, but it's equally as important as everything else here. The tough part with this is these devices are rarely updated and they are often overlooked. So it's imperative to not overlook this when you're thinking of securing your environment. These are just a few of the things that complete a picture of what needs to be protected in any environment. Now, why is enterprise security so important? Well, so far this year, almost 100 million people have been affected by data breaches. My favorite thing that happened this year, this is huge sarcasm, is my cell service provider texted me and thousands of others telling me that there has been a potential data breach, but of course, not to worry. Now, of course I was worried because I had already been kept up to date on the news, and I also know that cell service providers hold all the important stuff, social security numbers, addresses, bank information. But I really don't mean to pick on them, because we also know that there have been several more breaches this year, including banks, hospitals, and gas pipelines. Nowadays, companies not only hold their trade secrets, but they also hold employee data, customer data, including but definitely not limited to credit card numbers, addresses, socials, you name it. This isn't just limited to cell service providers either. Just think about hospitals, banks, local vendors, and essentially every other business in the world with customers. If this data isn't protected, not only will people's lives be potentially devastated and their information exposed, but the targeted company could lose millions of dollars between lawsuits and fines. This would also lead to the complete distrust of customers for potentially the next several years. For another example, let's chat about ransomware attacks for a minute. With these, you have to pay them to get your data back. But because this happened, you may lose trust once this reaches public eye, and you're not actually guaranteed that your data is still confidential. For example, a well-known car company was a suspected victim to a ransomware attack earlier this year, which resulted in the potential leak of customer data, as well as confirmed system outages affecting customers all across America. Now, while we're talking about ransomware, let's go into more what other threats exist out there. Methods of attack. So here I'm referring to behaviors. People are out there. They want your information. There are also people and employees out there who just make honest mistakes because they may not know any better. But this is why it's so important to train your people. There are also people who are malicious actors and do bad things on purpose. The MITRE Attack Matrix is a fantastic resource to really look at the different behaviors displayed by these malicious actors and how you can detect when these suspicious events occur, but we'll get more into that in just a minute. A little more on the untrained employees. There are really people who are out here making a living off social engineering. Whether it's physically gaining access to your corporate headquarters or sending some really convincing spear phishing emails that get opened by employees. They are always out here and they are always persistent. This is why it's so important to properly train employees and vendors on the importance of the data they're exposed to and train them on how to avoid unauthorized disclosures. When I say vendors, I mean this includes HVAC, building cleaning services, and anyone else who has physical access to buildings and who indirectly have access to your systems and resources. They need training too, since they are indirectly exposed to your data. I had previously mentioned the MITRE Attack Matrix, but it really deserves a more detailed mention here. The MITRE Attack Framework is a knowledge base of attack methodologies that is separated into categories several different ways. Like there's an entire matrix for enterprise and mobile, and this is further separated into Mac, a separate one for Windows, and one for Linux. I'll give you a few examples of what's in the enterprise matrix just so you can get an idea of the great information in there. So, first example, active scanning. This page will show you the description of the attack type as well as the sub-techniques, mitigations, as well as how you can detect the behavior within your environment. It also includes all references at the bottom of the page. With this example, active scanning specifically, it's when someone is actively scanning your environment for openly available information. Although there's no real way to prevent this within the realm of available preventative measures, it can be detected by monitoring your environment for suspicious activity. Next is automated exfiltration. In this example, you can see a list of malware that performs the specified action, which you can also click into for more information. Automated exfiltration is a behavior that results in data being sent to a third party without the need for any human interaction. I would also like to note that, as you can see on the right side of the web page, this affects Linux, Windows, and Mac OS systems, and it occurs via network connection. And lastly, as I have mentioned before, internal spear phishing is also in the MITRE attack matrix. I'm sure you've heard of phishing before. Well, spear phishing is when the phishing attempt is more targeted. Instead of sending to hundreds or thousands of email addresses, it targets one or very few users. Even more specifically, internal spear phishing is when the malicious actor has already infiltrated the target organization's accounts and uses internal email addresses to send targeted emails to users within the same org. It is pretty much phishing within phishing, phishingception. Now let's talk about the different types of malware. Malware really casts such a wide shadow. There are so many, but here are a few more well-known ones. Firstly, ransomware. This will absolutely render your data unavailable and will potentially cost millions of dollars to recover. Now, we talked about availability earlier. This will definitely make that not happen. And next, rootkits. Rootkits allow attackers consistent root privileges on your computer and survive reboots. It can do things like create permanent backdoors, which means attackers can figuratively walk right into your computer at any given time, as well as allows attackers to easily exfiltrate your data. Now, last but not least, this one deserves its own slide right now. Spyware is a type of malware that is specifically launched to users in order to collect their data. Now, on this, let's talk about Pegasus. It's a new sophisticated spyware that has attacked mobile devices this year. Yes, mobile devices. I'm not only talking about computers here. Nobody is safe from malware. Malicious actors have been using apps like iMessage and WhatsApp to infect iPhones and iPads without any user interaction whatsoever. The malware creates a backdoor, like we talked about earlier, to exfiltrate data from phone calls, messages, photos, all types of things. Super creepy. The specific CVE vulnerabilities are 30858 and 30860. Both of these indicate that the vulnerabilities have led to arbitrary code execution, but also inform us which critical software updates have completely resolved the issue. And this is why it's so important to update software and implement a good patch management system. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you how to prevent all this from happening to you. Now, how can we protect ourselves? Define your architecture. Define the scope of your devices, network, personnel, and the data you store and transmit. Accountability for all aspects of your architecture can bring you so much closer to becoming more secure, because the more visibility you have into your assets, the better prepared you can be for potential threats. Also, this way, you'll be aware of what data you need to regularly back up in case something like a ransomware attack happens or another malware renders your data unusable. Another fantastic way to protect yourselves is to deploy an endpoint security solution. Something that detects known malware as well as suspicious behaviors too is ideal, since threats are not only malware, but they can be people poking around in your computers, attempting to gain privileges, steal information, or shut you down entirely. Also, ensuring that your security solution has a way to stop malicious behaviors and processes is vital, since it's simply not enough just to know something bad happened. Ensuring that any malware trying to execute on your system is quarantined and or removed entirely is also key in protecting your environment. Back up your data. I cannot say this enough. Updating those backups on a regular basis is also very important. This goes back to what we talked about earlier with integrity. You know these backups contain the original, untampered data, and this will come in handy if your data ever becomes unavailable for whatever reason. You know, things happen. Data becomes corrupted, sometimes things just break. Not necessarily from anything bad, but it's the greatest fail-safe of all time just to have an exact copy of your data just in case. Ensure your apps and software aren't gaining any privileges that they shouldn't be. If your cool, newly downloaded app is suddenly gaining root privileges, that's definitely something that should concern you. Managing your app permissions is essential in preventing something like this from happening. On a Mac, you can simply go into your system preferences in the privacy section to update and monitor your app's permissions. As we talked about earlier, having a patch management system in place is key when it comes to keeping environments secure. Patches are released when new vulnerabilities are discovered, and I know it seems like a pain sometimes, but it's incredibly important to maintain the current version of your software. Now, using an MDM solution with the proper abilities can make this process far less painful and will help automate that as well. I mean, back in the day, I had to research CVEs every day for hours. Now my software updates are automated as soon as patches are released. Now, train your users too. Implement a training program for your employees and also make it mandatory for your vendors. Anyone who touches your systems or has access to your buildings should be aware of the importance of protecting your data and what the consequences would be if they released information either accidentally or on purpose. And perform regular checks to ensure users without a need to know aren't accessing any inappropriate data. This could also be considered suspicious behavior, especially when someone is attempting to access information from maybe projects they aren't necessarily working on, and in this case, vigilance is key. And lastly, I think this goes without saying, if you're legally required to adhere to specific standards, make sure you are doing just that and efficiently. Standards vary from industry to industry, like if you are a healthcare organization, you need to be adhering to HIPAA standards, etc. And even if you aren't legally required to adhere to any specific set of standards, it may be helpful to follow guidelines such as the CIS benchmarks just to really ensure your environment is as hardened as it can possibly be. Also, find solutions that make it easier to check your compliance on a regular basis, because non-compliance will result in, well, you being non-compliant, but also will result in your machines and information not being fully protected. More information on all of this can be obtained about everything I mentioned here, including the Pegasus malware on the Jamf blog. I hope you enjoyed our chat about enterprise security. Thank you all for joining me today. It has been an absolute pleasure.